Not this Christmas. A Christmas on Palmar Island Romance. Written by Susanne Ash. Chapter 1. All we need is to book flights and we're off, soaking in the sun and working on our tans, while everyone else wraps themselves in thick sweaters and complains about another rainy Christmas. Lulu bounced on the bed and opened her laptop. Are you sure that we can stay there? Both of us? Ashley sat next to her friend and looked at the images of the beautiful villa in Aruba that were on the screen. Luca says his stepdad doesn't mind. He's taking Luca's mom to Paris. Said he's welcome to invite some friends to spend Christmas with. Lucky for you, your best friend is the hottest girl on campus and got us an invite. Lulu grinned, full of herself as usual. Just because you made the cheerleading squad doesn't mean you're the most popular girl on campus. Ashley laughed. It may be a little bit of an exaggeration, but there was no denying that Lulu was popular and the sole reason for the invitation. Let's look at flights. Fingers crossed they're not booked out yet. We are cutting it kinda close. Lulu opened another tab and typed away. When were you thinking of leaving? Ashley asked. Classes were over and Clemson students were free to leave after the last of their exams. Thursday afternoon. Unless you still have exams? Lulu looked at her over her shoulder. Ashley shook her head. Wednesday night's chemistry exam was her last, and she was free until the new year. She couldn't wait. The semester had been brutal, and a 3-week trip to Aruba was exactly what she needed to decompress. I can leave Thursday. Good. And we can head out tomorrow to shop for bathing suits. I don't know about you, but I need a new bikini for a place like this. Look at the pool and the beach. Lulu sighed, no doubt already picturing herself lounging by the pool, having Luca and any other male in the vicinity admiring her in her new two-piece. It looks beautiful, Ashley admitted. Peaceful. Hopefully, it would stay that way when she and her friends invaded the property. I haven't been to the beach in ages. How about you? Lulu asked, flipping tabs to get back to pricing flights. It's been a while, unless you count Palmar Island. Ashley had spent a few days there this summer visiting her grandparents. I heard it's pretty down there. Lulu kept changing dates, looking for the best deal for their flight. It gets old when you spend every single vacation down there. Plus, does it count as going to the beach when you're staying with your grandparents? Ashley asked, thinking about the South Carolina barrier island her mother's parents called home. Definitely not. That's called family obligation. Lulu shook her bright red curls before returning her attention to the screen. I think I found something. It's a 2-stop flight and will take forever, but we can fly there and back for less than $400. Ashley swallowed hard. It was more money than she had in her bank account. Not bad, she said when her friend looked at her. Want me to book it? Lulu asked. Ashley shook her head. I need to call the parental units first about some financing. All right. Hurry up. I don't know how much longer those seats will be available. Lulu didn't look surprised. Her friend knew that money was more of an issue for Ashley than most of the rest of their friends who had trust funds and generous allowances from parents who had more money than they knew what to do with. I will. Give me 10 minutes. Ashley unplugged her phone and headed out into the hall in search of a bit of privacy for her call. Hey, Mom. How are things going? Ashley asked before answering her mother's questions about the final exams. Listen, I was talking to your grandparents yesterday. They'd love to have you spend winter break with them on the island. Wouldn't that be fun? The holiday fair, the beach. There's so much to do down there this time of year. Her mother sounded excited and a bit nostalgic. She always did this when they talked about the small town she grew up in. Palmar Island had its charm, and the town went all out in December, but it wasn't where Ashley wanted to spend the next few weeks. I was hoping to fly out to Aruba with some friends. Luca's parents have a house there and invited us to stay. That sounds nice, Ashley. My mother grew quiet. But your grandparents aren't getting any younger. They would love to see you. How many more Christmases do we get to spend with them? Ashley knew the answer to that one. Probably not a whole lot of them. Both were in their mid-70s. Mom. It's Aruba. I know, honey, but Aruba will still be there some other time. Grandma and Grandpa really want you there. They want to spend some quality time with their only granddaughter. And it's Christmas. Her mom had always been good at the guilt trip thing. What about you and Dad? Why don't the two of you spend time with them? Ashley asked. She knew it was a Hail Mary, but she had to try. I have to host your father's Christmas party. You know that. But we'll come down on Christmas Eve and we can all spend the holidays together. As a family. Ashley knew when the battle was lost. All right, Mom. Tell Grandma I'm driving down on Thursday after I drop Lulu off at the airport. Thanks, honey. You're not going to regret this, her mother said before hanging up the phone. Ashley regretted it long before she drove across the bridge onto the small barrier island. Yes, the marsh was pretty, as was the small town, all decked out for Christmas. But it was nothing compared to the pictures Lulu sent her. The contrast between the villa in Aruba and the small bungalow 1 block in from the beach where her grandparents lived was stark. Ashley. Her grandmother's huge smile and the tight hug that welcomed her made Ashley feel a little better. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad after all. It's good to see you. Her grandfather stood back, being his usual reserved self. The smile on his face and the pride in his eyes left little doubt that he was happy to see her as well. Come in. I have your mother's old room ready for you. Not much has changed in there, but we hung some fresh curtains, and I got you the most adorable bedding from that big linen store by the mall. Come see. Her grandmother pulled her down the hall, and her grandfather insisted on taking her bags. It's cute, Grandma. Ashley put her purse down on the small wooden desk where her mother had done her homework. The bright yellow curtains and matching bedspread were a nice touch. We'll let you get settled in. Your grandmother will have supper ready at 6. Her grandfather sat the bags down. Are you hungry? I can make you a sandwich. Did you eat lunch? Her grandmother scanned her from head to toe, no doubt determining she was too skinny. Ashley smiled. I had lunch on the road. Coffee would be nice, though, if it's not too much trouble. Of course not. I'll put on a pot right now, and I think there's some pound cake left. Her grandmother's voice disappeared down the hall as she rushed off into the kitchen. Food was the woman's love language, and she liked nothing better than feeding her family. Her grandfather pulled the door closed behind him, and Ashley sat on the bed with a sigh. The drive from Clemson had been long, and she was ready to grab a shower and decompress. An alarm went off on her phone when she pulled on a clean shirt and a pair of jeans. Crap. I almost forgot. Ashley dug her laptop out of the messenger bag she carried around on campus and sat it on the desk. Unsurprisingly, the battery was dead. One climb under the desk and another attempt at booting it up and she was in business. Just in the nick of time to catch Christy Madison's livestream. Ashley tried to connect to the Wi-Fi and realized she had no clue which of the 5 connections that popped up was the right one, or what the password was. Grandpa, what's your Wi-Fi password? She asked after rushing into the kitchen. Her grandfather was sitting at the kitchen table, reading the paper, a steaming cup of coffee in front of him. Wi-Fi? He looked up. Ready for coffee and cake? Her grandmother asked, already pouring her a cup. In a minute, Grandma. I need to check on something on my computer first. Ashley turned back to face her grandfather. Yes, your Wi-Fi connection. What did you call it, and is there a password? Oh, you want to get online? He folded his paper and put it down. You can use the computer in the laundry room. She followed him out to the small utility room off the attached garage and groaned when she saw a computer that looked museum-worthy and the dial-up modem she only recognized from a test in her introduction to computer science course. "Thanks, Grandpa, but I don't think this is going to work. I'll just use my phone." When they returned to the kitchen and Ashley sat down in front of her coffee and cake, she realized this would be even worse than expected. Her mobile connection in the house was horrible, barely strong enough to get an email, definitely not enough to stream a YouTube video. "How do you like the cake?" Miss Doris from down the street made it. It's a new version of her famous pound cake for a recipe she's working on. Her grandmother sat down in the chair across from her. Ashley took a bite of the cake. It's delicious. Probably the best pound cake she'd ever tasted. "Oh good. I'll let Doris know. I think she's entering it into the bake contest. Maybe you and I could come up with something to enter ourselves." Her grandmother's baby blue eyes were sparkling with excitement. "That sounds like fun." Ashley finished her coffee and cake and excused herself. She left the house and walked down to the beach in search of a stronger signal. She may be stuck here on the island for Christmas and miss out on the trip of a lifetime with her friends, but she was not missing first dibs on Chrissy's new makeup kit. It was going to be her Christmas present to herself and a consolation prize of sorts. Her sneakers hit the sand when she finally got a strong enough signal to get the YouTube stream to load. "Oh good, I haven't missed it yet," she muttered. "Haven't missed what?" "Aside from the view in front of you," a deep voice said. Ashley looked up and into the prettiest green eyes she'd ever seen. Chapter 2. Carter stared at the pretty dark-haired woman who almost ran into him on the beach. He'd come here for a breath of fresh air, and it was exactly what he found. She looked up and straight into his eyes. Hers were a light brown with golden flecks that shimmered in the low light of the sun. The breeze off the ocean tousled her hair. His fingers itched to brush it out of her hair, but she stuck her phone in the back pocket of the faded jeans she was wearing and pulled her hair into a ponytail. "Sorry. I didn't see you." Her voice was strong and rich, a little deeper than he expected. "I gathered." "In town for winter vacation?" he asked. She had to be a tourist. Carter was sure he had not seen her around town. If he had, he would have noticed. "Visiting my grandparents." She motioned in the direction of the beach access she walked down moments ago. "That's nice. I'm sure they are happy to have you for Christmas." He wished his own grandparents were still around. These days it was just him and his mom. It made for a quiet Christmas. "They are." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. There was a sadness about her he couldn't quite place. "I'm sorry, I have to take this," Carter said when his phone rang. He hoped she wouldn't run off. He took a few steps down the beach and answered the call. "Hey, Tommy, what's up?" "Hey, I got back from urgent care. It's strep throat. The doc gave me some antibiotics, but said it's gonna get worse before it gets better. Looks like I'll be down for the count for a couple of days. I know this is bad timing." It was. But this also wasn't Tommy's fault. The guy had looked like he was about to drop all day until Carter had sent him home. "Don't worry about it. Do what you need to do to get better. I'll have work for you when you're ready." He wrapped up the call and turned around, pleased to see the woman was still there. She looked like she was in her early 20s. About his age, or maybe a little younger. "Everything okay?" she asked, putting her phone away again. Carter shrugged. "I'll figure it out. One of my boys got sick." "Child?" she asked, looking surprised. Carter laughed. "No. Someone on my crew. I decorate houses for Christmas, among other things." "Sounds like a seasonal business." "What do you do the rest of the year?" she asked. "If you don't mind me asking." "Not at all." "You're right. We start right after Thanksgiving and wrap up a couple of days before Christmas." I also rent out and set up beach chairs, umbrellas, and gazebos during the summer. The rest of the year, it's mostly maintenance and cleaning. He scanned her face to see how she'd react. Most women weren't too impressed with how he was earning his keep. "You do all that on your own?" she asked, no judgment in her eyes. "Most of it. I have a crew of guys I can call when I need help. Like putting up lights and setting up Christmas trees this time of year. My guys and I put up the official town tree this year." That job had been a big coup. It paid well and spread the word about his little enterprise. "That's neat. How long have you been doing this?" she asked. "I got started in high school. Kinda grew and expanded it from there." Carter was proud of his accomplishments, even if his friends didn't understand why he hadn't gone off to college with them. "That's impressive. Hey, you wouldn't happen to know where I can get better reception on the island? Or maybe a place with Wi-Fi?" She pulled her phone back out of her pocket. "It's usually not an issue except for a few spots around Bird's Nest Park. It should work okay here on the beach." He watched her pull up YouTube, and her face lit up when whatever video she'd been trying to watch loaded. "The Roasted Bean Coffee Shop has good Wi-Fi. Mitch will give you the password if you ask him." "Thanks. You're a lifesaver." She pulled a pair of wireless earbuds out of her pocket. "No problem. Hey, they are lighting the tree tonight. You should come. There's a band playing and all sorts of fun stuff going on. I have it on good authority Santa will even make an appearance, and there's a rumor about a reindeer." He wished he could take the words back the moment they were out of his mouth. "How lame could you get? A tree lighting ceremony? That sounds like fun." "Are you going?" she asked, looking interested. "I'll be there. I should go. Hope I'll see you tonight." He turned and walked down the beach to the access farther south where his Toyota Tundra was parked. "Mom, I'm home," Carter said when he walked into the door of their apartment on Main Street. It was a small two-bedroom place they'd shared for as long as he could remember. He couldn't wait to move them into a bigger place, a house of their own. All part of his 5-year plan. "Carter. I was baking chicken, but I think the oven stopped. Will you come take a look?" His mother met him in the living room, dark rings under her eyes. She worked too hard. Double shifts at Mary's any chance she got. "Of course. Give me a minute to plug my phone in." He returned to the kitchen and pulled his toolbox out of the cabinet by the front door. It didn't take a degree in small appliance repair to realize that the stove's last days had finally come. "Can you fix it?" his mother asked, sitting at the kitchen table, hand wrapped around a cup of tea. Carter shook his head. "We're going to have to get a new one, I'm afraid. I'll ride out and pick something up in Myrtle Beach tomorrow morning. I don't want you to spend your hard-earned money on a stove." His mother looked at him, worry in her eyes. She looked tired. But then she always did. Had for as long as he could remember. Working 2 jobs to support her child would do that to you. "I had a pretty good month. I can afford to buy us a new stove." Sure, it would set his 5-year plan back a little, but not by much. And once he got his real estate license, unexpected expenses like this would no longer be an issue. Still. "I have a little money set aside." His mother got up and headed for the cookie jar that served as their rainy day fund. "Don't even think about it. I have this covered." Carter got up, washed his hands, and put away his phone. He was drying his hands when his phone rang. "I'll make us some sandwiches for dinner," his mother said, throwing out the chicken thighs that were half-cooked as he walked out the door and into his bedroom. "Carter, I had to call. You did such an amazing job with the house. We love it." The kids were so excited when they saw the little trees in their rooms. Phoebe Mattis, one of his longtime clients, was gushing on and on. It put a smile on Carter's face. Not only was the work he did this time of year profitable, it was rewarding. Something he wanted to experience more throughout the year. "I'm glad it worked out." Keep me in mind for next year and let me know if there's anything else I can do for you in the meantime, he said, stretching out on his bed, his muscles aching from a long day spent stringing lights, hanging wreaths, and setting up trees. The outdoor lighting stuff was the most physically demanding part of the job, but also the one most people needed help with. Not everyone was comfortable or able to climb up and down tall ladders to secure the strings of lights. I will do that. Listen, if you have time for a last-minute job, my neighbor could use your help. She's in her 50s, and her family decided to come down to the beach for Christmas break. Do you have time? Carter smiled. Funny how things worked out. He needed a couple of $100 to buy a new stove, and a job appeared out of thin air. I think I can make that happen. Do you have her contact information? Carter scribbled down the name and phone number and gave Mrs. Molly Hankins a call. Hey, Mom, I need to head out to talk to a potential client, Carter said when he walked back into the kitchen. Tonight? Will you be back for the tree lighting ceremony? His mother asked, handing him a ham and cheese sandwich. I'm not sure. I hope so. Should be good money. Another last-minute decorating job. Carter took a bite and shrugged into his jacket. If he hurried, he might be done with the preliminary walkthrough in time to make it downtown before the tree was lit. And with a little luck, he'd run into the girl he'd met at the beach. That's when it hit him that he didn't even know her name. Chapter 3. Where's Grandpa? Ashley asked when she walked into the kitchen the next morning. Out in the garage, tinkering with who knows what. The smile on her grandmother's face was so full of love it made Ashley's heart ache. There's fresh coffee, and I can make you some eggs and bacon. Coffee sounds great, but no food yet. It's a little early for me. Especially for the hearty food her grandparents ate for their first meal of the day. Ashley much preferred the smoothies she usually grabbed on her way to class. How about some toast and jam, then? I have homemade strawberry jam, your favorite. Her grandmother didn't wait for a reply and popped 2 slices of white bread in the toaster before Ashley could agree. Toast sounds great. What do you have planned for today? She asked, pointing to the cookbook scattered across the old kitchen table. I thought we could pick a couple of recipes for the bake sale. I'll make a couple of coconut cakes like every year, of course, but I thought it would be fun to try something new. What do you think? What are you in the mood to bake? Her grandmother handed her a cup of coffee and sat down at the kitchen table. They spent a relaxing half an hour looking through her grandmother's small collection of cookbooks, and Ashley introduced her to Pinterest while munching on her toast. Or at least she tried. Data reception in the house was almost non-existent. I still don't get it. People share pictures of their recipes? But how do you know how to make any of this? Her grandmother shook her head. Usually, when you click on the image, you are redirected to a website that has the recipe. It's easier when the internet's working. Ashley held back a wry smile and picked up her coffee, promising to look up a few recipes later. I'm sorry your friend didn't make it last night, Grandma said when they cleaned up the breakfast dishes and returned the cookbooks to the small bookshelf over the coffee maker. I'm not sure I'd call him a friend. I barely know the guy. We talked for a couple of minutes. I don't even know his name. She'd looked for him the entire time they'd been downtown last night, without luck. At least the tree was pretty, and the Christmas fair looked like a lot of fun. Well, if there's one good thing about living in a small town, it's that you run into people again sooner or later. I'm sure you two will see each other again. In the meantime, I'll put some feelers out to see who it could be. There are only so many eligible young men on the island. Her grandmother dried her hands and hung up her apron. Please don't. It's no big deal. Really? Ashley tried to convince her, but lost hope when her grandmother announced she was meeting with the rest of the bake sale committee at church. Why don't you go out and get some fresh air? That'll make you feel better, and it's such a pretty day, her grandmother said on her way out the door. It wasn't a bad idea. It might lift her mood. Ashley was more disappointed than she wanted to admit that she hadn't run into the handsome guy from the beach last night. It was the one bright spot and a bit of excitement in what was otherwise shaping up to be a pretty boring holiday break. She pulled on a hoodie, grabbed her phone, and walked out the side door, letting her grandfather know she was going for a walk on the beach. If nothing else, she'd get enough reception to check her emails and find a Pinterest recipe to share with her grandmother. The sun and fresh air lifted her mood, as did the stunning view of the ocean on this crisp winter day. It wasn't Aruba, but there was something to Palmar Island. And unlike yesterday, her mobile data worked like a charm. She found a decadent recipe for salted caramel brownies she couldn't wait to show her grandmother. The only disappointment was not getting any messages from Lulu. Still nothing, Ashley muttered when she checked one last time after sending her friend a quick note. "I was hoping to run into you here," a familiar voice said. Ashley was sitting on the beach, having a little personal pity party. She looked up and into the pretty green eyes she'd searched for last night. "It's you." "It is." The guy smiled, and an adorable dimple appeared on the right side of his face she hadn't noticed before. "I wasn't sure I'd run into you again." Ashley put her phone in her pocket and raised up. "Did you make it to the ceremony last night?" he asked, holding out a hand to help her up. She took it, his strong warm fingers wrapping around hers and pulling her to her feet. "I did. I didn't see you there." His eyes sparkled like he was pleased she'd kept an eye out for him. "I didn't make it. I had something come up." "Nothing bad, I hope?" Ashley asked. The sparkle was gone, and he looked almost as upset as she felt. "Depends on how you look at it." He shrugged and kicked a bit of sand with his feet. "Wanna talk about it?" "It's no big deal. I got a last-minute job, that's all." "That doesn't sound like a bad thing." She looked at him, watching his face carefully and liking how the sun brought out the highlights in his dirty blonde hair. "Yeah, the only problem is that none of my guys are available. Looks like it'll be just me." He looked worried and maybe a little defeated, his shoulders slumped. "Do you want some help?" she asked, as surprised as he looked when the words came out of her mouth. "Are you sure? It's hard work." "I'm sure," she said. "How hard could it be?" "A little decorating, putting up a few wreaths." It actually sounded like fun. If nothing else, it would be something to do. Chapter 4. "How are you holding up?" Carter asked, seeing the anguish on Ashley's face as they carried the large Douglas fir into the living room. "I'm fine," she said between clenched teeth as he lowered the trunk into the tree stand. "Push it on up." He raised his hand to help as much as he could, without losing hold of his end. "What do you think I'm doing?" She huffed and blew out a breath. He didn't have to see her to know she was blowing the stray strands of her mahogany hair out of her face. The rest of her hair was pulled into the low ponytail he was coming to associate with Ashley Pergit. Almost there. He used his upper hand to lift the tree into place, quickly securing the wingback screws that held the trunk in place. Stepping back, he surveyed their effort. "I'll grab some water from the kitchen." Ashley walked off, and Carter moved around the tree, adjusting it a little to the right to make sure it was straight. "How are you holding up with all this?" he asked when she returned with water for the tree and for him. "I'm fine." "Why? Am I slowing you down?" Ashley raised an eyebrow. "Not at all. Actually, I'm impressed. You could hold your own with most of my guys." He was telling the truth. She was doing great and had an amazing work ethic. Particularly for someone who refused to let him pay her. "Gee, thanks. All we're doing is putting up Christmas decorations." "Big deal." She flopped down on the couch after checking to make sure her jeans were clean. "Let's take a quick break, and then we should probably string the icicle lights along the porch while the sun's out on that side of the house." He glanced at his watch. They were making progress, but at this rate, they'd be here all day. Thankfully, the client wasn't in town for the next few days and had left a key for them with a neighbor. Let's get it done. Hang lights, decorate the tree. What's left after that? She asked, looking a little tired. You don't have to stay. If this is too much, he looked at her from head to toe. She wasn't just tired. She looked exhausted. I'm not leaving. I'll be fine. Guess I'm not in as good a shape as I thought I was. Getting these large houses ready for Christmas and keeping at it all day was hard work. All right. Let's do the lights, and then I'm taking you to get some lunch. Those muscles of yours need fuel. He led the way outdoors, where 2 ladders were waiting in the bed of his truck. What muscles? She asked, grimacing as she raised the taller of the 2 ladders to touch the side of the house. Carter made sure it was on solid footing before setting up his own. He handed her a string of lights and showed her how to attach them. They worked quietly for a little while, making their way up and down the ladder, repositioning it every few feet. Almost there, he said as he descended his yet again to grab more clips to secure the icicle light strings to the gutter. He was only a step away when something startled Ashley. She shrieked and jerked too far back. She tried to lean back toward the house, but it was too late. The moment had her tipping over. Jump, Carter yelled, relieved she took his advice almost instantaneously. He caught her, the force of the fall knocking him to the ground with her in his arms. Are you okay? He asked when he caught his breath. Ashley nodded. She was as pale as a sheet. Carter could feel her heart beating fast, and her breath washed over his face in quick little bursts. He looked at her face, seeing if there were any signs of pain. Hurt anywhere? He ran his hands over her arms, her shoulders, her back, checking any place he could reach from the awkward position they were in. I'm fine. Nothing broken, just a little shaken. Give me a minute. She pushed herself to her feet and took a few steps back. Good. Carter carefully rose himself, taking inventory. He'd come out of it all right too. Nothing more than a few bruises on his backside. Thank you. Ashley looked at him, the shock of the past few minutes still shining in her eyes. You're welcome. What happened? He looked at her carefully, trying to gauge the expressions on her face. She looked surprised, then scared, and finally embarrassed. So many emotions flickering in those pretty brown eyes. It was nothing, she finally said. You fell off a ladder for nothing? Carter looked at her, not buying a word of it. There was a spider, okay? I don't like spiders. She shuddered at the word. All right. Not to self. Don't put Ashley on a ladder if there's a chance there will be spiders. He stepped forward and placed her ladder back against the house. Ashley walked over and put her hand on it. No, you don't. You're done. There's barely 3 feet of gutter left. I've got this. The thought of putting her back up there made ice-cold shivers run down his spine. Are you sure? I'm fine. I'm pretty sure I scared the spider away. She didn't look sure. I am. You can hand me stuff if that makes you feel better. Or go sit on the porch and take a breather. He was working her too long and too hard. When you pushed yourself, mistakes happened. Carter knew this only too well from experience. I'm not sitting until you are. The determined streak he'd noticed earlier was back. Ashley held up the far end of the string of lights for him to grab as he made his way up the ladder. With her help, the last bit of lights was up in no time. He put both ladders back in his truck and turned to face her. Ready for lunch? My treat. I'm thinking Mary's Diner if you're up for it. Ashley hesitated. We can go somewhere else if you'd rather. That's not it. I'm a hot mess and rather not go out in public like this. Would you mind picking up something to go? Are you sure? The least I can do to thank you for helping me is take you out to lunch, he said. Ashley surprised him at every corner. I appreciate that, but I'd rather get a head start on decorating the tree. I'd take a cheeseburger, though, if you're still going. Her stomach grumbled, and her cheeks turned pink. It was a huge improvement from the pale face she had earlier and a sure sign she really hadn't gotten hurt. I can do that. But why don't you take it easy until I get back? Rest up. We still have quite a bit to do before I can call it a day. He looked at her, trying to judge if she was still game for working the entire job. Or I can drop you off at your grandparents' on the way to Mary's. I'm not a quitter, she said, taking off her boots and walking into the house. I'm back, Carter called when he walked back into the house, carrying a bag of food and a tray holding 2 cups from the roasted bean. It had taken a while stopping and ordering at 2 places in different parts of town, but he figured they could both use the extra rest before pushing through to finish the job. In here, Ashley called from the living room. The first thing he noticed when he stepped into the room was the beautifully decorated, lit-up Christmas tree. It was stunning. He glanced at the clock on the fireplace mantel. He'd been gone a while, but not that long. Ashley must have worked hard and, more importantly, quickly the entire time he was gone. The next thing he noticed was her, curled up in the oversized chair they'd pushed to one side of the fireplace to make room for the tree early. She was looking down on her phone, typing away. When he cleared his throat, she looked up and smiled. She was glad to see him, but the joy didn't reach her eyes. You're back. Give me 1 minute to finish this. Cold dread washed over him when he thought about what she was doing. His eyes darted from the beautifully decorated tree to the phone in her hands and back. You're not posting pictures of this, are you? Ashley looked up at him, surprised and a little hurt. Of course not. Why would you think that? Carter shrugged. It looks amazing. I'd be tempted to take a picture. In fact, maybe I should. It would make a great shot to convince clients who are on the fence about using my business. He held up the bag of food and motioned for her to follow him into the kitchen. So you're saying I did a good job, she asked when she took her seat across from him. The smile on her face was tiny, but it was an improvement from the way she'd looked moments ago. You did. I'm serious. It looks amazing. I have no idea how you pulled that off while I was gone. Lots of practice growing up. My mom and dad run their own company and host a big party every year on the 23rd. I've been helping decorate the house for it since I've been tall enough to reach. Ashley held her hand up 2 or 3 feet off the ground. All that experience is paying off. For me, at least. He handed her one of the boxes that held their cheeseburgers and fries. Can I ask you something? Sure. Ashley opened the styrofoam box, and her smile grew. Mary's food could do that to you. It was legendary on the island. Why did you look so sad? Carter scanned her face. Maybe that's not the right expression. Carter thought for a moment, recalling the memory of her sitting in the chair. Disappointed maybe? Ashley nodded. I was looking at my friends' Instagram accounts. They are in Aruba, having the time of their lives. She shrugged and bit into her burger, but he could tell it was bothering her more than she was letting on. Without you, he asked, picking up a couple of fries and dipping them into ketchup. Ashley swallowed her food and nodded. I was supposed to go, but came here instead to spend time with my grandparents. That's kind of you. Ashley laughed. It wasn't entirely voluntary. But I'm glad I'm here. It's just FOMO? He asked. He could relate. When all his friends left for college and he saw them out partying on a Thursday night, he'd wondered if staying here had been a mistake. That's part of it. What's bugging me more is that they're ghosting me, pretending I don't exist because I didn't join them. Sounds to me like you might need some new friends, he said, pushing a soda her way. Maybe. I still have to live with Lulu when we go back, though, and I have classes with most of them. Ashley changed the topic after that, and they discussed what was left to be done while they finished their meal. That was good, but I feel like I need to take a nap after all that food, Ashley said, scooting back in the kitchen chair and closing the box that had held her food. Good thing I stopped for these, then. Carter handed her one of the coffees he'd picked up at the Roasted Bean. Ashley lifted the lid and leaned over the cup. Peppermint mocha? How did you know? It's my favorite. The genuine smile on her face made the extra trip and the wait in line worth it. Carter felt a strange sense of pride in surprising her with the caffeinated treat. I may have glimpsed at your Instagram this morning and noticed you're partial to them. Thank you. That's very sweet of you. The caffeine and sugar fueled them through the afternoon, and the sun had set by the time they finally made it out of the house. Carter was exhausted and could only imagine how Ashley felt. It had been hard work, but the end result was stunning. His clients would be pleased, and, with a little luck, they'd hire him for years to come. I need a shower and a solid 12 hours of sleep, Ashley said when she climbed into the passenger side of his truck. Does that mean you're not up for doing this again tomorrow? He asked. Seriously? We're doing this again tomorrow? If you need the help, she looked at him, eyes wide, her mouth slightly ajar. It drew his attention to her strawberry red lips. Carter swallowed. He felt bad for teasing her and surprised she was ready to jump in to help him after today. He shook his head. I was joking. This was the last Christmas client. I'm planning on taking it easy until the first of the year. Oh, thank goodness. She buckled her seatbelt and sat back. I mean, I wouldn't have left you hanging, but it's gonna take you a couple of days to recover from this. I get it. They both grew silent as he made his way up the highway and back to Palmar Island. He was stopped at a traffic light when he turned to look at her. Ashley had her eyes closed, her face looking relaxed and her breathing even. He wasn't sure if she was asleep or on the verge of it, but it gave him a chance to look at her. To study her beautiful face. The long lashes that rested almost on top of her cheeks. The full lips that had grabbed his attention earlier. All too soon, the light changed to green, and he had to pull his eyes away from her. This was one of the big downfalls of small towns. Traffic lights changed much too quickly. At least they did tonight. We're here, he said softly when he pulled up in front of her grandparents' house. Oh. Ashley looked surprised and very sleepy. He jumped out and opened the door for her, insisting on walking her to the front door. You don't have to do this, she said. I know. The least I can do after all your help today is make sure you get home okay. He walked up on the porch behind her, suddenly reluctant for this day to end. He'd enjoyed spending time with her more than he'd realized. Ashley turned and looked at him. I had fun today. Carter reached over and took her hand. Thank you for all your help. I couldn't have done this without you. She nodded, and he took a step closer, drawn to her and those lips. He dipped his head when the porch light came on, blazing like a floodlight, illuminating them both. He barely had time to let go of her and take a step back before the front door opened and her grandfather stepped out. Ashley, everything okay? The old man asked, scrutinizing Carter. I'm fine. Carter was just walking me to the door. Ashley raised her hand and whispered goodnight before following her grandfather into the house. Good night. The door was already closing, and he doubted she'd heard him. Chapter 5. Hand me the sugar, would you? Ashley's grandmother asked. The two women were baking up a storm and had quite a few different cakes, cookies, and the salted caramel brownies in the works. The oven had been running almost non-stop since 6 in the morning, when her grandmother had baked the first batch of oatmeal cookies. They'd since been glazed and packed into small cellophane bags with snowflakes on them. They'd lost only half a dozen to Ashley's grandfather, who deemed them an appropriate breakfast food. I think I'm starting to see the end of the tunnel. Ashley crossed several items off their list. Once the brownies finished baking and the last batch of chocolate chip cookies went in the oven, they'd be done. Good thing, too. That'll give us just enough time to clean up and head over to the fair to set up. Her grandmother whisked the sugar, softened butter, and eggs together. It's going to be a long day. Ashley huffed and went to the oven to peek at the brownies. They were baking up as nicely as the last 2 batches had. It's for a good cause, and who knows? You might run into Carter. I'm so glad the 2 of you reconnected. What do you mean? Ashley was surprised. She'd met Carter on the beach a few days ago. You and Carter Hudson. I recognized him when he picked you up yesterday. Don't you remember? The 2 of you were inseparable that summer after first grade you spent with us here. Ashley shook her head. She remembered extended vacations with her grandparents and making friends along the way. But Carter? You have to remember. The 2 of you were inseparable. Played in the sands, building castles, swimming. Oh, and the 2 of you decided to send a message in a bottle. Begged me for an old wine bottle with a cork. Don't you remember? Her grandmother looked at her while slowly incorporating the flour with a wooden spoon that looked older than the woman wielding it. Vaguely. I remember a boy with light blonde hair. Ashley dug around in her mind, searching for memories hidden deep within. She hadn't thought about that time in ages. Here, finish adding the flour. I want to show you something. Her grandmother handed her the spoon and wiped her hands on the lined apron she wore before dashing off into the living room. She returned a few minutes later with a thick, leather-bound photo album. She cleaned off a space on the counter and flipped through it. Here. Come look at this. Ashley left the spoon in the thick dough and joined her grandmother. Together, they flipped through images of Ashley in a bathing suit, playing on the beach down the road from the house. She recognized the beach access in the background. And with this visual aid, she remembered the boy she'd spent the summer with all those years ago. I think you're right. I remember. He came over and we snuggled up on the couch and watched pirate movies. You made us popcorn in a pot on the stove. Ah yes, those movies must have been how you came up with the idea to put a message in a bottle. We didn't tell you at the time, but your grandfather found it washed up on the beach a few hundred yards farther south. He brought it back and hid it from you. It's probably still in the garage. Her grandmother cackled and returned to her cookie dough. 30 minutes later, the last of the cookies were cooling, and they were both rushing to change for the holiday fair. Ladies, we need to get this show on the road if we want to make it on time, Ashley's grandfather called from the hall. Start putting things in the car, her grandmother responded. Already done. Ashley smiled and pulled her dark green merino sweater over her head. It was the most Christmassy outfit she'd brought. On a whim, she pulled a cute dark red hat over her ears. It would be a little too warm for the handmade item, but the faux fur pom-pom at the end was adorable, and she liked how it looked on her. You're going to be too warm in that, her grandmother cautioned when they ran into each other in the hallway. I'll be fine. I'll bag up the rest of the cookies and meet you by the car. Setting up was a much quicker affair. Thanks to the tight-knit community of Palmar Island residents, their baked goods and the fold-out tables and chairs her grandfather had been busy loading while they got ready, they were up and running in no time. The entire table was filled with various cookies, cakes, pies, and any other type of baked goods you could imagine. Wow, people sure love this, don't they? Ashley asked, surveying the sizable crowd that continued to gather around their stand. No wonder her grandmother insisted on what she thought was an insane amount of cookies, cakes, and bars. Not to mention what everyone else brought. It's everyone's favorite fundraising event of the year, Miss Doris, an elderly woman who held the informal title of being the best baker on the island, said. Her pies sold out within the first hour. What's good? A familiar voice asked. Ashley looked up and felt the warmth creeping up her neck. The hat had definitely been a bad idea. She adjusted the collar of her sweater, pulling on it to let some of the cool December air cool her down. Ashley made these salted caramel brownies. They've been a big hit, her grandmother said. The words didn't help the sudden internal heatwave Ashley was experiencing. We'll take 4 of those. What else? Carter turned around to a woman who had the same dirty blonde hair and sparkling green eyes. Lemon pound cake sounds good, and I always like Mrs. Bronson's oatmeal cookies. The woman looked to be about 20 years older than Carter. His mom, Ashley guessed. Her grandmother looked pleased the woman had chosen her cookies and was busy chatting while she bagged up their purchase. Mom, this is Ashley, the girl I told you about. Carter stepped to the side and introduced the woman to Ashley. Carter told me what a great job you did the other day. Thank you for helping him. If it hadn't been for you, he probably would have worked through the night. Wouldn't be the first time this close to the holidays. The woman's handshake was firm, and the smile on her face warm and inviting. It was no big deal. All we did was decorate for Christmas. I had fun. Ashley felt herself flush again. Would you like to take a lap around the fair with me? Carter asked. Ashley shook her head. It was pure chaos around their table. I can't right now. It's an all-hands-on-deck situation. And you're good at those. Maybe some other time? Carter asked, looking a little disappointed. I'd like that. Ashley excused herself to help a young mother with impatient twins who were grabbing at the cookie bags. Where's Carter? Her grandmother asked a little while later. Finishing his walk around the fair with his mom, Ashley said, taking the brief moment of calm to straighten out the cookie display. You didn't want to join them? Her grandmother asked. Not really. Especially not while it's so busy. I might take a walk after things calm down. While part of her wanted to spend more time with Carter, this morning's revelations had thrown her for a loop. It would take a little while to sort through her childhood memories and come to terms with the fact that the boy she liked back then was the handsome man who'd almost kissed her last night on the porch. You're back. Ashley was surprised to see Carter a couple of hours later. She'd figured he'd been long gone by the time the bake sale started to slow down. Yeah, I dropped my mom off at home and thought I'd see if you'd like someone to show you around the place. It can get a little tricky with all the stands and stuff. His lip raised in a smile that made her insides melt a little. Go have fun. The girls and I will finish up here, her grandmother said, pointing to the small group of elderly women who made up most of the bake sale team. Are you sure? You'll need some help with those tables. Nonsense. We're not as frail as we look, and your grandfather will be back to help. Her grandma motioned for the two of them to leave. We have a lot of help, and there's not much left to sell, Miss Doris added with a confident smile. Before we go, do you have any of those brownies left? Carter asked. He bought the remaining 8 and slung the small paper bag. Ashley dropped them into across his wrist, holding his other hand out to her. Ashley took it without hesitation. It felt like the most natural thing in the world to walk hand in hand across the holiday fairgrounds. It was a sprawling affair, and Carter wasn't joking about needing a guide. Booths, tents, and tables were set up around a confusing grid of aisles. At the center of it stood the tall Christmas tree she'd seen on her first night here. I could use a hot chocolate, how about you? Carter asked when they passed a small food truck that offered the decadent hot beverage. I could drink one, Ashley said, looking at some handmade stockings at a stand next to it while Carter got them. There's a toppings bar set up over there, he said, pointing to a table covered in whipped cream containers, bowls of crushed peppermint candy and whole peppermint sticks, cinnamon, cocoa powder, marshmallows, and anything else one might consider adding to their hot cocoa. Don't mind if I do. Ashley felt like a kid in a candy store, adding a huge amount of whipped cream, a candy cane, and finally a dusting of cocoa powder before looking at what Carter was doing. Nutmeg, he held up the container. Tastes like Christmas to me, he added when she made a face. To each their own. Ashley took a sip of hers, and it was pure perfection. The peppermint stick added just a tiny hint of peppermint flavor, but she was sure it would intensify the longer it sat in the cocoa. Not like that would be very long. The drink was delicious and hard to put down. Ready to walk around some more? Carter asked, taking a cautious sip of his own. Yes, please. I'd love to see the Christmas tree in its full daylight glory. Ashley fell into step beside him as they strolled around the fair, taking in everything it had to offer. Which was a lot. There was a live band playing on a stage not too far from the tree, and off to one side, someone had set up an ice skating rink for the kids. It was some kind of hard plastic since the temperatures were still well above freezing, but the kids didn't seem to mind, skating back and forth across the fenced-in space, giggling and grinning and having the time of their lives. I don't think they had this when we were little, Ashley said. You've spent Christmases here before? Carter asked. I have, not usually this long, though. And summers too. Turns out, we actually met before. She looked to see if he had figured it out before her. We have? Carter asked, eyebrows raised. Ashley nodded. When I was 6 or 7. We built sandcastles, watched pirate movies, and sent a message in a bottle. Recognition lit up his face. Becca? He asked. I haven't gone by that name since I started middle school, but yes, I'm Rebecca Ashley Pergit. She resisted the urge to hold out her hand and shake his. You're Becca. Carter shook his head like he couldn't believe it. I've thought about you quite a bit over the years, wondering what happened to you. I guess I forgot that Mary and John were your grandparents. Are your grandparents, he corrected himself. I'm glad we ran into each other again, Ashley said softly. As am I. Carter looked at her, and the world around them disappeared. When someone bumped into her, the spell broke. Good thing I'm done with this. Ashley held up her cup and tossed it in one of the trash cans that lined the space. Carter followed suit. Let's go see the tree before the sun gets too low. He took her hand, and Ashley realized that it must be close to sunset. This day had flown by. As had the rest of her stay. How had she been here well over a week already? They only had a few days left before Christmas. It's beautiful. Ashley stared up at the tree. Knowing Carter and his crew had put it up and strung up the thousands of lights that would soon come on, along with hundreds of silver globes, made the tree even more special. It turned out good. Carter looked pleased, and she was happy for him. Is that Santa? Ashley rushed to the small building, and sure enough, Santa Claus was standing next to a door, obviously taking a brief break from taking pictures with everyone under 10 who lived on the island. Plus the children of all the tourists in town. The line was long, and a woman in an elf costume did her best to keep the kids in line. Merry Christmas, Santa said, waving at her. Merry Christmas to you too. Is that an actual reindeer? Ashley asked, sensing Carter step up beside her. It is. You can pet him if you're careful. Just don't let the kids see you. They keep trying to feed him candy canes, and too much sugar is bad for the little guy. Gives him gas. Santa threw the last of what she assumed was coffee down his throat and went back into the small building, much to the delight of the waiting kids. It's an actual reindeer. Ashley grinned, surprised how much fun she was having. Who needed Aruba when you had family, a handsome guy who looked at you like he couldn't wait to kiss you, and an actual reindeer? We need a picture. You and me with the tree in the background. Carter pulled his phone out of his pocket and pulled her close, holding his arm out as far as he could. Want me to take that for you? The elf asked. Are you sure you have time? Ashley asked, eyeing the line of children. I'm sure it will be fine if we're quick about it. She took the phone from Carter and took a few steps back. Smile. Try to get the reindeer in, if you can, Ashley said. Because who wouldn't want a Christmas picture that included a real-life, actual reindeer? No one would believe her without pictorial proof. I don't think that's going to be a problem. The elf grinned, and Ashley felt her hat slowly being pulled off. Hey! That isn't food. She pulled her hat off and held it off to the side, using her free hand to fluff up her hair before the elf took several quick pictures. "Thanks so much," Carter said when he took the phone from her. "They are perfect, thank you." Ashley watched the elf whose name she didn't catch turn and walk back toward the kids. "You're welcome," she called over her shoulder. "Look up." It took Ashley a moment to grasp what the woman had said. When she glanced up, she saw a piece of mistletoe hanging over their heads. "What a lucky coincidence," Carter muttered, waiting for her to look at him. When she did, he slowly lowered his head in a move that felt all too familiar from the other night. To her relief, no one stopped him this time, and his lips brushed across hers. She felt his arm wrap around her waist, pulling her closer. He deepened their kiss. She could taste a hint of chocolate and nutmeg on his lips as the sound of the band playing yet another Christmas song faded away. Ashley's eyes fluttered shut, and she lost herself in the kiss she'd dreamed of last night. The real thing was 1,000 times better. Chapter 6. I'm heading out to the roasted bean. Want me to bring you anything back? Carter called down the hall. His mother stepped out of her bedroom. Again, she asked. I'm meeting Ashley, he explained. You two are thick as thieves. She smiled. It's nice to see you happy. Carter shrugged. Yes, he was happy, but this wasn't something he wanted to talk about. Besides, he was running late. Can I bring you something back? I should only be gone an hour or so. I'd love one of Mitch's blueberry muffins if you don't mind. His mother returned to her bedroom, and the sound of the tape ripping resumed. She must be wrapping presents. You've got it. Ashley was waiting for him, her soft brown eyes brightening with excitement when she caught sight of him. I've been waiting for you. Not too long, I hope. Carter looked at the coffee cup on the table. Her peppermint mocha was barely touched, and a cup of black coffee was waiting for him. Not really. She laughed, and it made his heart sing. Just long enough to check on some emails and make sure I have everything I need for classes in January. What are you taking? He asked, sitting before picking up his coffee. It was piping hot. Creative writing, broadcast journalism, accounting, and American Lit. That's an eclectic mix. Journalism degree? He asked. That's the plan. Graduate and then travel for work, paying my way, writing for whoever will hire me. Maybe start a travel blog or publish some guidebooks or something. I'm still working on the details. Sounds like a pretty good plan. He sat back and watched her finish her work. How about you? What are your plans? Aside from decorating a bunch of houses for Christmas next year. Or do they hire you to take it all down come January? She asked. They do, but this just pays the bills for now. He shared his 5-year vision with her. Saving up and studying for his real estate license. Buying a couple of rental properties. A house for him and his mother. He laid it all out, sketching his plan on a paper napkin. Sounds like you have it all planned out, but aren't there places in other areas of the U.S., or even here in South Carolina, that would be more profitable? Or at least a place where you can buy properties that are less expensive. This area is kinda pricey, isn't it? Ashley asked. You're right, but this is home. Why would I want properties anywhere else? Carter looked at her, surprised by her reaction. Well, have you gone out and looked? Her eyes were bright with the challenge. Carter leaned back in his chair and took a sip of his coffee. Nope. That's ridiculous. How would you know if you've never gone anywhere else? Her eyebrows were drawn together. You make it sound like I've never been anywhere. Palmar Island is home, and that's where I'm choosing to build my business. There's nothing wrong with that. Ashley huffed. Don't you want more than this? Travel, see the world? Carter shook his head. Not really. I'm happy here. I don't get it. She shook her head, visibly upset. And I don't get why you're making such a big deal about this. Don't you want a place to call home? Security? Somewhere to belong? He watched her face carefully. These things were important to him. Had been ever since he was a little boy. Not right now, no. I want to travel, see the world. Figure out where I may want to end up. You can't do that when you spend your entire life on a tiny island in the middle of nowhere. Ashley put down her cup. Wow, that's harsh, he said. It's how I feel. Looks like we have some very different ideas about what we want out of life. Carter was surprised how disappointed he felt. They barely knew each other. Which was a big part of the problem. I guess you're right. And who were we kidding? It's not like whatever this is, or was going to last past the first of the year when I go back to Clemson, anyway. Ashley closed her laptop and shoved it into her purse. Right. Carter sat there, watching her pack her things. Ashley got to her feet. I'm glad I ran into you. Merry Christmas, Carter. And then she was gone. There you are. Did you get that muffin? His mother called from the kitchen when Carter walked into the door. His head was spinning. Ashley walking out on him like that was throwing him for a loop. It wasn't until he got into his truck and headed home that he realized how hard he'd been falling for the young woman. But it was too late. She was gone and had made it clear that they were done. Sorry, Mom. I forgot. Carter sat down at the kitchen table and stared off into the distance. His last moments with Ashley kept playing in his head. It was a never-ending loop, his mind trying to come to terms with what had happened. Carter, what's wrong? His mother wiped her hands on the dish towel and sat down across from him. It wasn't until she reached across the table to take his hand that he came out of his daze and looked at her. I'm not sure. Carter ran through each of their meetings in his mind. Had he read too much into their time together? Given the kiss they'd shared too much significance? Ashley didn't show, his mother asked. She was there. We talked. What did you two talk about? She probed gently. The future. Our plans. Carter shook his head. That had been the big misstep on his part. If only he'd kept his mouth shut. But then what? She was bound to find out eventually that he had big plans and that they all centered around Palmar Island. And they were plans built on a solid foundation. Something he'd worked on for years and put a lot of thought into. Could she be right, though? Was he thinking too small? No, that wasn't the right word. Was his focus too narrow? You told her the whole 5-year plan? And it scared her off? His mother asked. Ashley is young. You both are. Thinking that far ahead may be scaring her. No, that's not it. She thinks I'm thinking too small. That I should be looking outside of Palmar Island. Expand my reach, scope out different locations. Carter shook his head. What if she's right, Mom? What if I'm too focused on Palmar Island? I can't answer that, Carter. It all depends on what you want. Deep down in your heart, do you want to move away from Palmar Island and build something elsewhere? She asked. No. This is my home. Here with you. He squeezed his mother's hand. Let's take me out of the equation. And realize that you can come back and stay with me whenever you like. Would you still want to live your life here? Her eyes were scanning his face, studying his expression. Of course. This is home, and it always will be. Then this is my advice to you. Keep your heart open, see how this goes, but also stick to your principles and your plan. Don't give up or change everything for another person. I tried that when I was young, and it didn't work out. Dad, he asked. He barely remembered his father. The man had chosen to have little contact with his son after he and his mother returned to Palmar Island when he was barely 2. His mother nodded. I tried to change who I was and what I wanted. I wish I'd never done that. Don't repeat my mistakes, Carter. Neither one of them. What's the second mistake? Carter asked. closing my heart. I wish I hadn't shut everyone else out. I was hurt, and it seemed easier to focus only on raising you and never putting myself out there again. Who knows what I missed? Who I missed. She looked sad, and, for the first time, Carter realized that she was lonely. It's never too late, he said. Good. I hope you take that to heart. His mother rose and went back to the sink to finish the dishes. Carter left the house and drove down to the beach. He needed to clear his head, but there was more to it than that. He walked down the public access he had when they first met, hoping to see Ashley on the beach in the spot he thought of as theirs. Of course, she wasn't there. He stood there, thinking, dreaming, and waiting until it began to rain. Carter was shivering, standing there, soaking in the empty beach, the gray ocean, and the cold breeze coming off the water. He let himself feel the loneliness that wrapped around his heart, squeezing it until it hurt so much he could barely breathe. This place was different from what it had been a few weeks ago. The whole island was different. It was hard to put into words. Palmar Island felt less welcoming, less like a home without Ashley. Which didn't make sense, because he was 99% sure she was still here. But she was no longer with him. Chapter 7. There was a soft knock on her door. Ashley, are you awake? Her grandmother asked. I'll be out in a minute, Ashley said, sitting up in bed. The realization that this was Christmas Eve hit her as the scent of cinnamon rolls baking wafted in her room. It didn't feel like Christmas. Not after she and Carter had their argument yesterday. I'll pour you some coffee, her grandmother called and walked down the hall. Ashley forced herself to crawl out of bed and threw a sweatshirt over her PJs. She brushed her teeth and splashed cold water on her face before joining her grandparents in the kitchen. Good morning. Sleep okay? Her grandfather asked, eyeing her carefully. Good morning. Ashley ignored his question and focused her attention on the coffee and cinnamon roll in front of her. Even the sugar and caffeine didn't brighten her mood. All right, you're coming with me, her grandmother said an hour later. We can't have you moping around all day. It's Christmas Eve, after all. Where are we going? Ashley asked. The determined look on her grandmother's face told her that declining was not an option. To drop off presents for a few of my friends. Eat your cinnamon roll and get dressed. Again, it wasn't a request, and Ashley did as asked. Their outing took them across much of the island, ending at Miss Doris's house, one of her grandmother's oldest and best friends. Come on in, you two. I'm so glad you could join us, Ashley. Can I offer you a piece of pie? Ashley was about to decline when her grandmother spoke up. Of course. Turning to Ashley, she added, Miss Doris bakes the best caramel apple pie you've ever tasted. You weren't exaggerating, Ashley said when she took her first bite a few minutes later. Are those raisins? Soaked in bourbon and vanilla. It gives it that little something extra. And a good dash of cinnamon to make it taste like Christmas. Miss Doris smiled, her gray eyes twinkling with delight. I think this is just the pick-me-up Ashley needed today. You can't help but get into the spirit with a treat like that. Your house looks beautiful, by the way. Her grandmother waved her fork around, pointing to the various Christmas decorations. It was pretty, but it was also a stark reminder of her time with Carter that had ended so abruptly. Ashley took another bite of pie and washed it down with the coffee Miss Doris had poured them. The pie turned out to be perfect comfort food, but not quite enough to make her forget about her sorrows, self-inflicted as they were. I'm surprised you're not in a better mood. It's Christmas Eve, and I hear your parents are coming tomorrow to spend Christmas Day with you and your grandparents, Miss Doris said. Boy trouble, her grandmother said. You don't say. Ashley and Carter are on the outs? No wonder he didn't look like himself when I ran into Carter this morning. Miss Doris shook her head. I'm right here, you know? Ashley muttered, keeping her eyes on her plate. We know, dear. Miss Doris patted her hand. Do you know what happened? I sure don't. Ashley won't talk about it. Until yesterday, they were thick as thieves. Or at least that's what I thought. They sure were spending a lot of time together. Seriously, I'm right here. And I'd prefer if you didn't talk about us. About me, I mean. It wasn't like she and Carter had more than a fleeting, brief romance. It never would have worked between them with him here and her returning to Clemson at the beginning of the new year. Alright, we'll stop if you tell us what happened. Believe it or not, we might have some advice for you. We've had our share of boyfriend trouble. Miss Doris's face was friendly, and Ashley got the feeling the smile was a reaction to specific memories of that sort of trouble. She couldn't imagine ever having that reaction. We decided we want very different things from life and that there's no point in pursuing things further. That's all. It's no big deal, really. It's not like we were actually dating or anything. She swallowed the lie along with the dark and bitter coffee that cut the rich sweetness of the pie perfectly. I see. I think there are a few things you should know about Carter. Don't you agree, Mary? Miss Doris asked, looking from Ashley to her grandmother. I do. I'm sure you know that Carter was raised by a single mother. Ashley nodded. They didn't always have it easy. I don't believe the dad was ever in the picture much, and there was no financial support. Her family did what they could, but at the end of the day, Carter's mother worked 2 jobs to put food on the table and give them a place to live. Her grandmother grabbed her hand and squeezed it. I knew some of that, Ashley said. There were times when they didn't know where the money for rent or for their next meal would come from. I believe that's why Carter is working so hard. He's a determined young man. He told me his goal is to buy his mother a house in the next year or 2. If you ask me, he'll make it happen. No one works harder than Carter Hudson. He does, but he's not thinking big enough, Ashley said. He's stuck in this mindset of staying here to take care of Mom. There are so many amazing opportunities out there that he's missing out on. He's not even considering living anywhere else. Because this is where his home is. It's where he wants to be. What's wrong with that? Miss Doris asked. How can he know that if he's never been anywhere else? Ashley asked. The 2 older women grew quiet. Finally, Miss Doris spoke up. I think some people simply know where their home is and where they want to lay their head at night. We need to respect that. Not everyone has the urge to travel. I haven't done very much of it myself. I don't get it. Even if you think this is where you want to be, I think you owe it to yourself to explore. To make sure. I wouldn't want to wake up one day and regret spending my entire life on a small island in the middle of nowhere. How was your visit? Her grandfather asked when they returned to the house a few hours later. Fine, her grandmother said. She took her coat off and hung it on the hook by the door before retreating to the laundry room. That bad? He asked, looking at his granddaughter. I think I said some things that upset her. Ashley felt awful. She'd watch her grandmother's face fall at her comment about spending an entire life on Palmar Island. It wasn't meant as a dig on the life her grandparents had led. The life Miss Doris had led. The life they were still leading. If that was their choice, fine. But she wanted Carter to at least consider something bigger and better. Come with me, her grandfather said, pulling a cardigan over the button-down shirt he was wearing. Ashley followed him out to the garage. I made a stupid comment about spending your whole life in this little town. Ashley pushed herself up to sit on the old kitchen table that served as her grandfather's workbench. Ah, I see. He busied himself sorting screws. I didn't mean anything by it. I think it's great that you and Grandma built a life for yourself here. I was talking about Carter. He's so young, and he spent his entire life here. He hasn't seen anything of the world. How could he possibly know this is where he wants to spend the rest of it? Her grandfather chuckled. How old is Carter now? 22? 23? Ashley nodded. I was busy building this house when I was his age, he said. That gave Ashley pause. It was hard to imagine her grandparents as a young newlywed couple. We all have choices to make in life, and no matter which one we make, we have to give something up in return. Sounds to me like he's choosing to give up something different from you. Not really. I'm deciding not to choose. I want it all. Travel, see the world. And then decide where I want to settle down once I'm sure. What if you're never sure? He asked, holding up his hand when she started to answer. Or what if after years and years of traveling the globe, you decide that this is home? You will have lost years that you could have spent building a home and being part of a community that cares for you. I guess that's a risk I'm willing to take. Ashley hopped down, suddenly not so sure about her convictions that Carter was making the biggest mistake of his life. Then that's the sacrifice you're willing to make. It's part of life. Anything worthwhile takes work and sacrifice. It's what makes it valuable. Her grandfather's tone was somber. What do you mean? She asked, feeling even more confused about all this talk of sacrifice. If you don't have to pay a price, if everything comes too easily, you don't treasure it. You don't value it. Let's take you, for example. You worked long and hard to make it into Clemson and get that scholarship of yours. Some of your friends didn't. Do they have the same sense of accomplishment and fulfillment with mom and dad footing the bill? He asked. Ashley thought about this for a moment, recalling some of her conversations and arguments with Lulu. Her friend was already ready to meet up and stay out late, even on the night before important exams. She didn't care about her grades or how long it would take her to graduate. For Ashley, it was a different story. So far, she'd always thought of it as a disadvantage. Maybe there were some benefits to having to work for it. I don't think it does. Ashley didn't get a chance to elaborate when her grandmother called them into the house to have supper. I think someone wants a word, her grandfather said when they arrived at church for the Christmas Eve service. Ashley looked up. Carter and his mother had come to a stop a few yards in front of him. Talk to him, her grandmother encouraged, and her grandfather looked at her with so much love and understanding it brought tears to her eyes. Nodding and blinking them away, she made her way to Carter. Merry Christmas, Ashley, his mother said. I'm going to go have a chat with Mrs. and Mrs. Bronson. I'll meet you inside, Carter. Merry Christmas, Ashley said, scanning Carter's face carefully. She'd heard him yesterday, that much was clear. Merry Christmas. Walk with me, he asked, motioning for the path next to the church where a few other parishioners made their way to the historic building. What I said the other day came out a little harsh. I had some other stuff I was dealing with. Something to do with my friends. Not that it's an excuse or anything. Ashley felt the warmth rise into her cheeks as she struggled to find the right words. What happened? Carter asked, falling into step beside her. They all made plans to go to Europe next summer and didn't bother asking if I wanted to go. It sounded lame saying it out loud. Lame and petty. Do you want to go? Carter asked. Of course. I'd love to see Paris, London, Rome. But it wouldn't work out, anyway. I can't travel the way they do, with their Black American Express credit cards. She shook her head, watching the dream turn into a white puff of air and fade away. That doesn't mean you can't travel. I'm sure you could find a way to do it on a budget. They walked in silence for a few steps. Why are you so nice to me after everything I said yesterday? Ashley asked. I basically accused you of being small-minded and old-fashioned. Those aren't necessarily bad things. Carter slowed his steps and finally came to a stop. You gave me a lot to think about. If it was just me, traveling all over the country and looking at different markets might be an option. But it isn't just me. You have your mother to think about, Ashley said, turning with him to walk back toward the church. They'd gone farther than she'd realized and might not make it back before the start of the service. I do. But that doesn't mean I don't want bigger and better things. Maybe even travel. If I had someone to go with me. He smiled, and it lit up his entire face. You mean that? Ashley asked, holding her breath. I do. I know this is all very new, and we barely know each other, but I'd like to see where this goes. If that's something you want as well, he said, his eyes never leaving hers. I do, Ashley said, and then grabbed him and pulled him in for a kiss. It was over all too soon, both of them painfully aware they were standing a few yards from the entrance to the church where a few late strugglers were making their way up to the double doors that led into the sacred space. Carter held out his hand, and she took it. Together, they walked inside to join their families. Epilogue. There you are. Come on in. Ashley watched her grandmother usher Carter and his mother into the house. She caught a glimpse of the man she loved behind his mother, eyes scanning the room until they connected with hers. The smile on his face melted her heart. Are you sure we should be here? We wouldn't want to intrude, Carter's mother said, gripping the casserole dish she was holding. Of course we are. Otherwise, we wouldn't have asked you over last night, her grandfather said, ushering them farther into the room while her grandmother took the dish to add it to the dining room table laden with food already. Ashley cleared her throat. Her cheeks grew warm when everyone's attention was on her. She turned to face her parents, who'd kept in the background as the visitors arrived. Mom, Dad, I'd like you to meet Carter and his mother. Carter stepped up, making his way around his mother and her grandparents to shake her father's hand. It's nice to meet you. Ashley had no doubt her father appreciated that show of confidence. I hear you're very special to my daughter. Her mother, on the other hand, beamed and pulled Carter into a warm hug that made him so uncomfortable Ashley broke out into a giggle and found herself joined by her grandmother. I think she likes him already, Grandma whispered before rushing off to the kitchen to put the finishing touches on the big traditional Christmas lunch. Everyone ate until their stomachs were about to burst. Anyone ready for presents? Her grandfather asked, rising from the table. The rest of their group joined him after a few minutes spent by everyone insisting to do their part to put away the food, load the dishwasher, and set the pots and pans in the sink to soak. They'll be fine there until the morning, her grandmother declared when she ushered everyone out of the kitchen and back into the living room where the presents were stacked under the tree. I seriously doubt that. The sink will be sparkling clean before your grandmother goes to bed, Ashley's mother told her in a conspiratorial voice. You're not wrong about that. Here, this is from your mother and I. Ashley's grandfather handed her mother a box wrapped in sparkling golden wrapping paper before handing a similar one to Ashley. They were matching photo albums of the two of them spending time on Palmar Island as little girls, playing on the beach and splashing in the waves. Carter kept in the background as her family exchanged the majority of their gifts, opening a box of gourmet chocolates that her grandmother had wrapped for him and his mother early this morning, talking to Ashley about the importance of always having a couple of backup gifts in the cupboard. This is from me, he said, dropping a small white box, closed shut by a wide red ribbon, into her hands. Ashley's fingers shook as she struggled to untie it and open the box. Inside, sitting on a cotton cloud, was a Christmas star, suspended from a thin silver chain. It was delicate and absolutely perfect. A symbol and a constant reminder of their first Christmas together. She knew she would treasure the small piece of jewelry forever. It is beautiful, she said, blinking away tears as she struggled to fasten it around her neck. Here, let me help. Carter's face was so close to hers as he leaned in, taking the delicate chain from her hands. She could feel his warmth and his breath. She closed her eyes and reveled in the feeling of closeness, this private moment in the middle of a family celebration. Do you like it? He asked, his eyes shining with pride at her wearing his gift. I love it. Her hand reached up to touch the star. I have something for you too. Ashley rose and retrieved the gift she'd tucked into the very back of the pile that morning. What's this? Carter held the small fabric-wrapped bundle in his hands, turning it this way and that. Ashley caught her grandfather grinning and winking at her conspiratorially. "You'll have to unwrap it to find out," she said. "Where did you find this?" Carter asked, looking dumbfounded as the old glass bottle that held the letter they'd written as children, telling whoever would finally retrieve the message in some far-flung part of the world of a treasure they'd buried in an old tea tin on the beach. "It washed up on the beach right after we left. Grandpa found it and hid it in the garage. I didn't know about it until a few days ago." "I thought you'd like to have it back," Ashley said, pleased with her surprise gift. "I have no idea what happened to our treasure box, though." "We can go look for it tomorrow," Carter said before pulling her into his arms and giving her a quick kiss in front of both their families. "What are you doing here? Everything okay?" Carter asked when she showed up on his doorstep several hours later. The sun had set, and her parents and grandparents had settled in to watch a Christmas movie and rest after a long day of holiday celebrations. "I wanted to bring this back, in case your mom needs it." Ashley held out the clean casserole dish. It was an excuse to see him, and she was glad that he didn't seem to mind. "Come on in. Mom's laying down." Carter led her into the kitchen, where a real estate textbook and several notebooks were spread out across the small table. "Hard at work?" she asked, not surprised he'd be studying on Christmas Day. If there was one thing she'd learned about this man, it was that he was dedicated and determined. He was driven, a man on a mission, and it was a big part of why she'd fallen in love with him so quickly. Seeing him in action and working alongside him for an entire day had a lot to do with that. "I had a few minutes to myself." He closed the book and stacked everything together in one corner of the table. "Can I get you anything?" Ashley laughed. "No, thank you. I don't think I'll need anything else to eat or drink for a week." Carter joined in. "That was some spread. Your grandmother doesn't play small, does she? Not when it comes to food and feeding her loved ones. You better get used to it." She reached for the necklace, like she'd done a dozen times or more already, ensuring herself it was real and still there. "I guess that means you plan on inviting me over again?" Carter's eyes were twinkling with mirth. "That's the plan." "Hey, when did you have time to go shopping?" she asked, holding the star pendant in her fingers. "I bought it the day after we worked on decorating the mansion. I wanted to thank you for your help, but deep down, I think I knew there was more to it than that." He pulled her in for a kiss, lingering for a moment before his lips brushed across hers. His hand wrapped around the back of her head, supporting her and guiding her closer as he deepened their kiss. Ashley thought for a moment about how nice it was to kiss him without an audience, and then her conscious brain shut down and she lost herself in the feeling of being in Carter's arms, kissing until they both were gasping for air. "We should do that more often," she whispered, her forehead touching his, neither of them willing to let go of the intimacy of this quiet moment. "We really should." Carter's voice was rough, his breathing ragged. "Are those my brownies?" Ashley asked when her eye caught the familiar sight of the snowflake-covered cellophane bags on the kitchen counter behind him. "They are." Carter took a step back, the tips of his ears turning red. "So are you saying you couldn't get enough of them?" Ashley said with a chuckle. "You've got that all wrong. I've been savoring them. I should probably freeze the rest to make them last." He turned to grab the remaining 4 bags. Ashley put her hand on his arm to stop him. "No need for that. I'll bake you salted caramel brownies anytime." "And have me pick them up in Clemson?" Carter asked. "Something like that. Or I could bring them when I come down to visit." Ashley beamed up at him. He turned and pulled her close to him again. "I might have to take you up on that," he said before lowering his head for another kiss. The end. This has been Someone Special. Written by Susanne Ash. Copyright 2022 by Susanne Ash. Production copyright 2023 by Susanne Ash. Thanks for listening. Please like and subscribe if you want me to put more of my books on YouTube. Visit my website at www.susanneash.com for more of my books or find me on Amazon.